We're going to begin, though, with the battle for the GOP presidential nomination. It's getting more personal after the New Hampshire primary. Now, CBS News projects a win for Donald Trump in yesterday's contest against former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. But in her speech last night, Haley said she is not dropping out of this race. Instead, she is vowing to fight on, and she is sharpening her attacks on the former president.
And speaking of attacks, former President Trump gave a victory speech that at times felt angry to some and included some threats threats of investigations, veiled and not so veiled, in many people's view, if Nikki Haley does not drop out of this race, and soon. We've got team political coverage today, including how the Biden campaign is responding. But we're going to begin with Caitlin Huey Burns in New Hampshire, where I was just yesterday. Caitlin, good morning.
Hey, Tony, good morning to you. Well, you got out just before the snow came down here in New Hampshire. It had held off yesterday, which led to record turnout, and independents showed up big, too. But still, it wasn't enough for Nikki Haley to overtake Donald Trump. However, she's vowing to plow on, and this remains, at least for now, a two-person race.
With New Hampshire, it's back-to-back victories for former President Donald Trump as he moves closer to the Republican presidential nomination.
We have to do what's good for our party.
Trump's win in the state, where nearly half of the voters identify as independents, adds to questions about former Ambassador Nikki Haley's path to victory. And Trump spent a majority of his speech last night appearing almost angry as he fixated on his only remaining GOP opponent.
This is not your typical victory speech, but let's not have somebody take a victory when she had a very bad night. She had a very bad night.
Trump's success in New Hampshire comes down to the strength of his base. According to CBS News exit polls, 80% of Trump's voters described their support as strongly for him, while only 30% of Haley's voters said they strongly favor her. Most of her backers said they were voting for her with some reservations or because they disliked Trump.
New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not the last in the nation.
Still, Haley is vowing to stay in the race, criticizing her 77-year-old rival.
With Donald Trump, you have one bout of chaos after another. This court case, that controversy, this tweet, that senior moment.
While Trump appeared to forecast a bruising campaign against Haley if she stays in the fight, and he leveled baseless accusations.
And just a little note to Nikki. She's not going to win. She's not going to win. But if she did, she would be under investigation by those people in 15 minutes, and so would Ron have been, but he decided to get out. He decided to get out.
But Haley says it's on to her home state of South Carolina.
Every time I've run for office in South Carolina, I've beaten the political establishment.
I did hear Nikki say, and now it's off to South Carolina. Well, I love South Carolina.
And speaking of South Carolina, that contest doesn't happen for another month. But if you live there, get prepared for the ad wars. Nikki Haley's campaign is spending nearly $4 million on ad buys there, and she's headed to South Carolina tonight for a rally in North Charleston. Tony?
Lots of money being spent. Caitlin, thank you very much. Let's go to Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa. Bob, good morning to you. When we were speaking yesterday, you said Nikki Haley needed single digits to convince donors to give her the money to stay in this race for the long term. Looks like she's in double digits behind Donald Trump. Is that enough?
Good morning, Tony. As Caitlin just said, there's a month between now and the South Carolina Republican primary. And in politics, a month can be a lifetime. Based on my conversations last night with top Haley allies, they're going to spend the coming days trying to figure out, is the money there? Is the momentum there? Meeting with donors, meeting with campaign officials in these further voting states, not only in South Carolina, but on Super Tuesday in early March.
So what are you hearing, Bob, about the Trump strategy going forward? He took a lot of personal pot shots at her last night.
Oh, Gayle, you are so right. We are now not just in a political campaign. We are in a season of political war. Look for a barrage of attacks on the airwaves, on social media from former President Donald Trump and from many members of the Republican Party. They are going to start coming out with more endorsements in the coming days, pressuring Haley to get out of the race and say it's time to coalesce around Trump.
Bob, Nikki Haley's talking about chaos on the Trump side. He's got all these legal entanglements. But so far, unless I'm missing something, it seems to be helping him, not hurting him. What's your read on that?
The key there is what you just said, Tony, so far. Right now, Trump campaign officials believe all of this on the legal front is helping Trump. It's stoking the grievances of his supporters. It's helping him generate momentum in this Republican race. At the same time, what's notable is behind the scenes, many Republicans are telling me they're concerned about what's on the horizon. If Trump's the nominee and then he's in court all of the time, even during the Republican convention, facing a trial on January 6th, classified records and so many other things, that could be a drag on the entire Republican ticket.
All right, Bob Costa, thank you very much.
I know we haven't talked about it a lot, but there was actually a Democratic primary in New Hampshire yesterday. It wasn't sanctioned by the National Democratic Party, and President Joe Biden wasn't actually on the ballot, but he easily won it as a write-in candidate over other challengers. Biden's campaign is already turning its attention to the general election, and Nancy Cortez is at the White House and has more on that. Nancy, good morning.
Good morning, Nate. Yeah, they are looking past the primaries. Mr. Biden's allies say that Donald Trump is knocking out some of his top GOP rivals more quickly than they expected, which means they need to speed up some of their general election plans. That means some staffing moves at the top of the campaign and stepping up their attacks on Trump.
Donald Trump is betting you won't vote on this issue.
In Northern Virginia, President Biden argued one man is responsible for the full or partial abortion bans that now exist in 21 states.
It was Donald Trump and his Supreme Court who ripped away the rights and freedoms of women in America. And it'll be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and all of you who are going to restore those rights for the women of America.
Even as he spoke, his campaign was keeping an eye on events unfolding in New Hampshire. Biden campaign officials saying Donald Trump has all but locked up the GOP nomination and labeling Trump's victory speech bitter and confused sounding.
They used COVID to cheat, and they did a lot of other things, too.
Abortion rights will be a major theme for the Biden-Harris campaign. And here's one reason why. Exit polls from New Hampshire last night found that 2/3 of Republican primary voters oppose a national ban on abortion that's been proposed by some congressional Republicans.
Extremists are trying to pass a national abortion ban to outlaw abortion in every state. But what they need to know is that we will not allow it.
And yet another issue is likely to dog President Biden throughout the campaign season. Pro-Palestinian protesters interrupted his speech over and over last night and had to be escorted out.
We got a couple more of these, I think.
We learned last night that President Biden is going to be sending 2 of his top White House aides to join his campaign sooner than expected, to the relief of Biden allies who had been urging such a move for some time. The Biden campaign is also signaling that the GOP presidential primary race is over by selling these new T-shirts with the slogan, quote, "Together we will defeat Trump again." Gayle.
All right, Nancy, we shall see. Thank you. The growing number of American airstrikes in the Middle East could also become an issue on this campaign trail. The U.S. military hit targets in both Iraq and Yemen last night after attacks on American forces. Charlie D'Agata reports on the risk of a wider war in the region.
With each F-18 fighter jet taking off from the USS Eisenhower and yet more overnight bombing raids, America's involvement in what has now become a regional fight has escalated by the day and night. The new strikes against both Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Houthi targets in Yemen follow U.S.-led bombing raids just the night before, conducted alongside British Typhoon fighters. Defense officials say the strikes were retaliation for more than 150 attacks directed at U.S. forces throughout the region since the war in Gaza began, endangering the roughly 900 elite U.S. troops in Syria who we have visited in recent years and witnessed fighting alongside local Kurdish forces battling ISIS. to American troops on bases across Iraq, where the military maintains a force strength of around 2,500 soldiers. But it was the massive missile strike on the Al-Assad air base in Iraq over the weekend, injuring 4 U.S. service members, that triggered last night's counterattack. The local Iraqi militias and the Houthi rebels in Yemen, all backed by Iran. On the strikes in Yemen, U.S. officials downplayed any talk of escalation.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't define it as a conflict. Again, I would define it as action that's being taken to disrupt and degrade Houthi capability to conduct attacks against the international community.
The strikes have not gone down well in Iraq, and these are U.S. partners. The Iraqi National Security Advisor calling it a flagrant violation of Iraq's sovereignty, saying the U.S. should pile pressure on Israel to halt the offensive in Gaza rather than bombing parts of Iraq. Tony?
Charlie D'Agata for us in Tel Aviv. Charlie, thank you very much. We've got breaking news from Russia, where a military plane carrying dozens of Ukrainian prisoners crashed this morning, killing everyone on board. Amateur video shows the plane going down, or a plane going down, not far from Ukraine's northeastern border, and you can see the fireball rising in the distance. The cause of the crash not clear, but Russia's defense ministry says 74 people have died, 65 of them prisoners, 3 escorts, and a 6-person crew.
Here at home, a new round of storms is causing serious flooding in parts of the South. Up to 7 inches of rain fell in Texas yesterday, turning this underpass into a lake. The rising water flooded many homes and businesses in the eastern part of the state. For more on today's flood threats, let's bring in meteorologist Stephanie Abrams with our partners at the Weather Channel. Steph, good morning. How much more rain is the South likely to get?
Nate, we could get another 1 to 2 months worth. We have the threat for flash flooding yet again today, tornadoes, damaging winds all along the lower Mississippi River Valley. The heaviest rain will be in the south, but the system stretches into the Midwest, into the Northeast. Tomorrow, many of the same areas will be wet, and we could see more strong thunderstorms rumbling across the Gulf Coast. Through the end of the week, 5 to 8 inches could accumulate in the south, 1 to 2 inches in the Northeast, and it's mainly liquid precip, thanks to our highs being 10 to 20 degrees above average today into tomorrow. Highs will get into the 50s all the way into New England. Now, there's a lot of weather happening in the west, too. By the end of the week, multiple storms will crank out 3 to 5 inches of rain and feet of snow, and there's no stopping it. Into next week, we will see moisture continue to pour ashore, and the extended outlook shows it is very likely that precip in the west will be above average. For more in-depth coverage, you can watch the Weather Channel on cable or live on your favorite TV streaming devices. Nate, all of this weather should put a dent in the drought that we have in the Northwest and in the South.
All right, well, I guess that's good news. Stephanie Abrams, thank you.
A man in New York who shot and killed a 20-year-old woman who was in a car that took a wrong turn was convicted yesterday of second-degree murder. The jury needed less than an hour to find Kevin Monahan guilty of the murder of Kaylin Gillis. She was a passenger in her boyfriend's SUV when they pulled into a driveway looking for a party. Monahan came out with a shotgun, fired it, hitting Gillis in the neck. He testified that the fatal shot was accidental. Monahan faces 25 years to life in prison, and prosecutors plan to ask for the maximum sentence.
Another bump in the road for Boeing after news this morning that a Boeing jet is making headlines after it lost a wheel preparing for takeoff. Yikes. Delta Airlines says the Boeing 757 was heading to Columbia, was on the runway at the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta when a tire fell off of its landing gear at the nose of the plane. It was reported by a pilot on another plane. All the passengers were taken off this aircraft, put on a replacement plane. The FAA says it is investigating. Our transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve reports the plane in question is 31 years old, and this incident appears to be a maintenance issue.